The galaxy had seen many strange things in its long history, but nothing quite as strange as the humans 300 years ago. They had arrived on the galactic stage, and everyone had expected war and destruction because the humans came from Earth, which was classified as a Class 7 Death World, and that classification meant something terrible. Class 7 Death Worlds were planets where everything wanted to kill everything else, and the fact that humans had not only survived, but thrived on such a world made every other species nervous. The first contact had not gone well. 3 aggressive species had decided to test these newcomers, and what followed was brief and brutal, and it left those 3 species nearly extinct within months. Galaxy learned a lesson that day. Humans were not to be provoked, but then something unexpected happened instead of conquering and expanding like every other Death World species in history. The humans had stopped, and they had looked at what they had done, and they had been horrified by their own capacity for violence. So they made a choice. They built walls around their nature, and they created rules and regulations and meditation techniques and 1,000 small rituals designed to keep their inner monsters sleeping over 3 centuries. They became known as the Gentle Giants of the Galaxy. Ambassador Kethrix of the Villani Communion had been working with humans for 20 years, and she still did not understand them. She watched the human delegation enter the Concord chambers, and she noticed how they smiled at everyone and how they apologized when their heavy, gravity-dense bodies accidentally cracked the delicate floor tiles. Their hands were wrapped in ceremonial gloves because those hands which could crush metal and tear through armor were considered too frightening for the more delicate species to see. The lead human ambassador, James Chun, moved with exaggerated slowness, as if he was afraid of startling anyone, and he probably was Ambassador Kethrix. He said in that soft, careful voice all humans seem to use, "It is wonderful to see you again." Kethrix extended her tentacles in the Villani gesture of greeting. "And you, Ambassador Chun," she replied. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Very much so, thank you for asking." This was what humans had become, polite and gentle, and so very, very careful. Kethrix remembered reading the old histories and the accounts of those 3 species who had attacked humanity, and she remembered the descriptions of human soldiers who had fought without fear and without mercy, and who had kept fighting even when wounded, even when dying. She looked at Ambassador Chun with his soft smile and his gloved hands, and she wondered where that human had gone. The answer was that he was still there. He was just sleeping. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin was James Chun's older sister, and she had spent 40 years in the human defense force without ever firing a weapon in anger. This was not because she was weak or because she lacked skill. It was because she was very, very good at her job. Her job was to make sure weapons never needed to be fired. She commanded the diplomatic vessel Harmony, and her mission was to travel the galaxy and solve problems. Before they became wars, she was good at it. She sat in her quarters aboard the Harmony reading reports from the Outer Rim when her door chimed. "Enter," she said. Her first officer, Commander David Okafor, stepped inside, and his face was troubled. "Admiral, we have received some strange readings from the deep space sensors." Wei-Lin set down her tablet. "What kind of readings?" "We are not sure, ma'am, but they are coming from the direction of the galactic void, and they are unlike anything in our database." Wei-Lin frowned. The galactic void was the empty space between galaxies, and nothing came from the void, because nothing lived there. "Show me," she said. They walked to the bridge together, and Wei-Lin studied the sensor data on the main screen. The readings were strange indeed. Something was moving through the void toward the galaxy, and it was big, and there was a lot of it. "Can we identify it?" Wei-Lin asked. "No, ma'am, but whatever it is, it will reach the outer systems in approximately 6 weeks. Wei-Lin stared at the screen, and something deep in her chest stirred. It was a feeling she had not felt in a very long time. It was the feeling her ancestors had felt when they heard wolves howling in the darkness outside their caves. It was the feeling of a predator. Sensing another predator, increase our sensor range, she ordered, and send the report to command with all our data and flag it as priority 1. Yes, ma'am. Weylin returned to her quarters, but she could not sleep. She kept thinking about those readings, and about the void, and about something her grandmother had told her when she was a child. Her grandmother had been a soldier in the First Contact Wars, and she had done things that still haunted the family. We are wolves, her grandmother had said, and we have learned to live among sheep and protect them, but never forget what you are, and never let them make you forget either, because one day the other wolves will come, and on that day the sheep will need us to remember. Weylin had always thought her grandmother was being dramatic now. She was not so sure on the Concord Station. Ambassador James Chun was attending a formal dinner with representatives from 30 different species. The Villani were there with their tentacles and their bioluminescent skin. The Kreth were there with their forearms and their warrior pride. The Mindari were there with their huge heads and their massive intellects, and the humans were there with their gloves and their careful movements and their soft voices. James sat next to a Kreth warrior named Gorthax, who had been drinking something that would have killed most other species. Tell me, human, Gorthax said, his voice booming. Is it true that your homeworld has creatures called sharks that are nothing but teeth and hunger? James smiled. Yes, that is true. And you swim in the same water as these creatures. Some of us do, yes. Gorthax laughed a deep rumbling sound. You Deathworlders are insane, and I mean that as a compliment. James nodded politely. Thank you, I think. But tell me something. Gorthax leaned closer, and his breath smelled like engine fuel. Why do you hide what you are? And why do you pretend to be soft? And why do you wear those ridiculous gloves? James looked at his gloved hands. Because we choose to, he said simply. But why? James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was different somehow. And it was deeper and older, and it carried a weight that made Gorthax's warrior instincts suddenly pay attention. Because we learned what happens when we do not hold back, and we saw what we are capable of, and it frightened us more than it frightened anyone else. Gorthax stared at the human, and for just a moment, he thought he saw something behind those soft brown eyes, something ancient, something dangerous, something that was only pretending to sleep. Then James smiled again, and the moment passed. But enough about that. James said cheerfully, Tell me about your homeworld, and I hear the hunting there is excellent. Gorthax blinked and shook his head. For a moment he had felt like prey. He had not felt like prey since he was a child. Looked at the smiling human with new eyes, and he wondered for the first time what humanity was really hiding behind all those walls across the galaxy. The readings from the void grew stronger. Something was coming, and it was hungry. 6 weeks passed, and the thing from the void arrived. It came to Velith Prime. First Velith Prime was the homeworld of the Villani people, and 12 billion souls lived there, and they had known peace for over 1,000 years. They did not know war. They did not know violence. They only knew that one morning they woke up, and the sky was full of metal. The harvesters had no name for themselves, because they were not alive in any way that mattered. They were machines, ancient machines built by a civilization that had died so long ago that even the stars they had orbited had burned out. But the machines remained. They drifted between galaxies in the cold void, and they waited, and when they found life, they descended, and they harvested, and they used the organic matter to build more of themselves. They had consumed thousands of civilizations across millions of years. They did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They only harvested. The first Villani city to fall was called Kethris, and 3 million people lived there. When the harvester ships descended, the people looked up in wonder, because they had never seen anything like these vessels, and they thought perhaps these were visitors from some distant galaxy. Then the harvesting began. The machines did not use weapons in the traditional sense. They used fields that paralyzed organic matter, And then they used extraction beams that pulled the living tissue from bones and the bones from the ground. The screaming started in Kethris, and it spread Ambassador. Kethrix was off-world when the attack began, and she was attending a conference on the Concord station when she received the emergency transmission. She heard her people dying. She heard children crying for parents who were already gone. She heard the sounds of civilization being eaten alive. The Galactic Concord responded with emergency meetings. Representatives from 100 species gathered, and they talked and they debated and they argued about jurisdiction and protocols and proper responses. Hours passed. More cities fell. The screaming continued. Admiral Chen Weilin was 3 systems away when she intercepted the distress signal, and her blood ran cold. The transmission was nothing but screaming and the sound of machines and the desperate pleas of people who knew they were about to do. Weilin stood on her bridge, and she listened, and something inside her began to wake up. Admiral Commander Okafor said, "Concord Command has issued instructions, and we are to evacuate all diplomatic personnel from the region and proceed to a safe distance." Weilin did not respond. She was still listening to the screaming. Admiral Okafor said again, "Our orders are clear." "How many ships does the Concord have in this sector?" Weilin asked. "Approximately 200, ma'am, but they are holding position pending authorization from the Council." "And how long until the Council authorizes action?" Okafor checked his console. "At current rate of debate, perhaps 18 to 20 hours. How many Villani will be dead in 20 hours? Okafor was silent. Weilin turned to face her crew. They were good people. They were diplomats and scientists and engineers. They had signed up for peaceful missions and cultural exchanges. They had not signed up for war, but they were human, and humans remembered. "Open a channel," Weilin said. "All frequencies and maximum range." "Ma'am." The communications officer nodded and opened the channel. Weilin took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried across 17 star systems. "This is Admiral Chen Weilin of the Human Defense Force to all human vessels in range, whether military or civilian or commercial. And I am breaking protocol to send you this message." She paused, and the bridge was silent. "You have all heard the stories of what we used to be, and you have all heard how we chose to change, and how we chose to be gentle, and how we chose to hold back." Another pause. "The Villani are dying, and the Concord is debating, and no one is coming to help them. And 12 billion innocent people are being harvested like crops." Weilin felt the old fire building in her chest. "I cannot order you to do anything, and I cannot promise you survival, and I cannot promise you that what we are about to do will make any difference." She straightened her spine. "But I can tell you this." Her voice dropped lower and harder and older. "I am done holding back, and I'm going to Velith Prime, and I'm going to fight, and I'm probably going to die." She looked at her crew, and she saw the same fire building in their eyes. "If you remember what we are, then follow me." She cut the channel. The bridge was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Commander Okafor spoke. "Ma'am, our vessel has ceremonial weapons only, and we have 40 crew and no Marines, and we cannot possibly make a difference against a fleet of that size." Weilin looked at him. "I know. We will die. Probably. This violates every regulation and every treaty and every protocol we have sworn to uphold." "Yes, it does." Okafor stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was not a diplomatic smile, and it was not a careful smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had finally been let off his chain. "Setting course for Velith Prime, ma'am, and shall I have the crew prepare for combat?" "Yes, Commander, and tell them to remove their gloves." Across 17 star systems, the response began. Captain Marcus Okonkwo of the cargo freighter Persistent Memory was hauling refined titanium through the outer shipping lanes when he received the Admiral's message. He gathered his crew of 12 in the cargo bay. "You heard the message," he said, "and I will not lie to you because this is suicide, and we are a freighter with no weapons and no armor and no chance. His engineer, a woman named Sarah, spoke up. We have the mining laser, and if we strip the safety protocols, we can boost its power significantly. It still would not be a real weapon. No, but it would be something. His pilot, a young man named Thomas, raised his hand. We have a full cargo of titanium, and if we weld it to the hull, we would have some armor. Not enough to survive. No, but we would survive longer. Marcus looked at his crew, 12 humans. 12 people who had chosen to haul cargo through the peaceful lanes of the galaxy. 12 people who could turn around right now and no one would blame them. Anyone who wants to leave. Marcus said, take an escape pod, and I will make sure you get home safe, and there is no shame in it. No one moved. Sarah grinned. Captain, with respect, we did not sign up to live forever, and we signed up to be human. Marcus felt his throat tighten. All right, he said. Let us go remind the galaxy what that means. Across the stars, similar scenes played out. Research vessels began weaponizing their equipment. Luxury yachts overloaded their engines for ramming speed. A hospital ship loaded every surgical laser it had, and the chief doctor painted 3 words on the hull. The words were nitrogen monoxide, MRCY, and somewhere in the Concorde Chambers, Ambassador James Chen received word of what his sister was doing. He closed his eyes. He remembered his grandmother's words about wolves and sheep, removed his ceremonial gloves, and he looked at his hands. They were the hands of a killer. He had spent his whole life pretending otherwise. Ambassador Chen, a Villani aide, asked, "Are you all right?" James opened his eyes. "No," he said, "but I am about to be." He walked out of the chambers, and he did not look back. The message spread like wildfire through the human networks. It was not an official order, because Admiral Chen had no authority to give such an order. It was a simple question, that reached into the heart of every human who heard it. Do you remember what we are? On the mining station Tartarus 9, a crew of 47 humans stopped their work and listened to the Admiral's words. Their foreman was a massive man named Victor, who had spent 30 years drilling asteroids, and he had hands like shovels and a voice like grinding stone. "Well," he said when the message ended, "I suppose we have a choice." His crew looked at him. "We can stay here and keep drilling and let those people die and go back to pretending we are just like everyone else." He picked up a plasma cutter that was designed to slice through solid rock. "Or we can remember what our ancestors were and what our grandparents did, and what we have been hiding from ourselves for 300 years. He looked at the cutter in his hand. "I know what I'm choosing." The mining ship Tartarus Thunder was not designed for combat. It was designed for breaking asteroids. But asteroids were hard and ships were soft, and Victor figured that what worked on rock would work just fine on machines. On the pleasure yacht Golden Dawn, a wealthy human businessman named Richard sat in his leather chair and listened to the message. His captain, a retired naval officer named Helena, stood before him. "Sir, we have received the Admiral's transmission." "And what are your orders?" Richard was not a brave man. He had inherited his wealth, and he had spent his life avoiding anything dangerous or difficult, but he was still human, and something in the Admiral's voice woke something in him that he had not known existed. "How fast can this ship go?" he asked. "If we remove the safety limiters and overload the engines, we could achieve ramming speed, but it would burn out the core, and we would have no way to stop or slow down. Would it be fast enough to hurt those machines?" Alana smiled, and it was not the polite smile she usually wore. "Sir, at full burn, this ship would hit like a small asteroid." Richard stood up. He had never done anything meaningful in his entire life. He had never risked anything, had never fought for anything. "Do it," he said, "and remove the limiters and burn everything we have." "Sir, are you certain? Because this is a one-way trip." Richard looked out the window at the stars. "I have spent 50 years being comfortable," he said, "and I think I would like to spend my last few hours being human instead." Helena nodded and turned to leave. "Helena," she stopped. Thank you for giving me this chance." Elena's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you for taking it, sir." The human fleet began to gather. It was not a real fleet. It was a collection of cargo. Ships and mining vessels and private yachts and research stations and hospital ships and anything else that could move through space. They had no coordination and no training and no proper weapons, but they were human and they were done holding back. Admiral Chun watched the sensor readings as more and more vessels changed course toward Velith Prime, and she felt something she had not felt in decades. Pride. "Ma'am," Commander Okafor said, "we are receiving transmissions from the approaching vessels, and they are identifying themselves." "Put them through." The bridge speakers crackled with voices. "This is the cargo freighter." Persistent memory answering the call. "This is the mining ship Tartarus Thunder, and we are bringing the heavy equipment." "This is the yacht Golden Dawn, and we are coming in hot." "This is the research vessel Discovery, and our scientists have weaponized everything, including the coffee maker." "This is the hospital ship Mercy, and we have renamed ourselves No Mercy for the duration." More voices, more ships, more humans remembering what they were. "This is the passenger liner Exodus with 300 human tourists who have volunteered to crew any station that needs hands." "This is the construction platform Hammerfall, and we build things for a living, but we figure we can break things too." "This is the fuel tanker Prometheus, and we are basically a flying bomb, so we might as well use that, Admiral." Chum felt tears on her cheeks, and she did not wipe them away. "How many?" she asked quietly. Okafor checked his console, and his voice was thick when he answered. 437 vessels, ma'am, and more arriving every hour." 437 ships. Most of them had no weapons. Most of them had no training. Most of them would die. And they came anyway. The Vellani emergency channels still broadcast the sounds of their people dying, and the screaming, and the terror, and the desperate pleas for help that no one in the Concord was answering. But now there were new transmissions on those channels, human transmissions. "Velith Prime, this is the human cargo vessel Persistent Memory, and we are coming, and hold on. This is the mining ship Tartarus Thunder to any Vellani who can hear, and the cavalry is on the way. This is the yacht Golden Dawn, and I have never done anything brave in my life, but I am doing it now, and we are coming for you. This is 400 human vessels, and we know we are probably going to die, and we are coming anyway, because that is what humans do." The screaming on the Vellani channel stopped for a moment. Then a new sound emerged. It was a Vellani voice trembling with something that had been absent for hours. "Hope. Human vessels," the voice said. "This is Velith Prime Emergency Coordinator, and I do not understand, and you have no fleet, and you have no weapons, and why are you coming?" Admiral Chun answered, "Because someone is hurting innocent people, and because we can help him, because we have spent 300 years pretending to be something we are not." She took a breath. "We are humans, and we are Deathworlders, and we have remembered what that means." The Vellani coordinator was silent for a long moment. "Thank you," the voice finally said. "Thank you for remembering, Admiral." Chun looked at the star chart, showing the converging human vessels, cargo ships and yachts and mining platforms and hospital ships. 437 vessels crewed by humans. Who knew they were going to die? And they came anyway. That was what the galaxy never understood about humans. They were not dangerous because of their strength, or their speed, or their endurance. They were dangerous because they would choose to die for strangers. They were dangerous because they would look at impossible odds and charge anyway. They were dangerous because they remembered being prey, and they remembered becoming predators, and they remembered what it felt like to protect the weak. The wolves were awake, and they were hungry for justice. The human fleet arrived at Velith Prime in waves. They did not arrive in formation because they were not trained for formation. They did not arrive with a battle plan because there had been no time for planning. They arrived as a tide of steel and fury and desperation. Admiral Chun was among the first to reach the system, and what she saw made her stomach turn. Harvesters filled the sky like a swarm of metal locusts, and there were thousands of them, and they ranged from small collector drones to massive carrier ships the size of small moons. Below them, Velith Prime burned cities that had stood for millennia were being systematically stripped of all organic matter, and the ground was turning gray and dead, and the rivers were running with ash. Admiral Commander Okafor said, "I am reading over 6,000 harvester vessels, and our fleet consists of 437 ships with improvised weapons." "I can count, Commander." "Ma'am, the odds are." "I know what the odds are, and they do not matter." She opened a channel to the fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chun, and I am not going to give you a speech about glory or honor, because we do not have time for speeches." She watched as more human ships dropped out of faster than light travel around her. "The machines down there are killing innocent people, and we are going to stop them, and some of us are going to die, and probably most of us." She paused. "But here is what I want you to remember, and here is what I want you to hold on to when things get bad." Her voice hardened. "We are the children of Earth, and we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived and we thrived, and we became the most successful predators our planet ever produced." She leaned forward. "Those machines down there have destroyed thousands of civilizations, and they have never lost, and they have never been afraid." She smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Let us teach them fear." The battle began. The harvesters had never encountered anything like the human fleet. Their programming was based on millions of years of experience, and that experience told them that organic life forms fled from superior force. Organic life forms did not charge directly into the teeth of a vastly larger enemy. Organic life forms did not ignore damage that should have been fatal. Organic life forms did not keep fighting after their ships were torn apart. The humans did all of these things. The cargo freighter Persistent Memory led the first wave, and Captain Marcus had welded every piece of titanium in his hull to the hull, and the ship looked like a metal porcupine. "All hands," Marcus called out. "Brace for impact." They hit the first harvester vessel at full speed, and the titanium armor crumpled, and the harvester's hull cracked, and both ships tumbled through space, locked together. "Engineering," Marcus shouted. "Get me that mining laser online." "Laser is hot, Captain." "Fire into the breach and give them everything we have." The mining laser, which was designed to cut through asteroids, punched into the wounded harvester, and the machine began to tear itself apart from the inside. "We got one," Thomas the pilot yelled. "Good, and find me another target." The Persistent Memory was bleeding atmosphere, and half its systems were offline, but it was still moving, and it was still fighting. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. The mining ship Tartarus Thunder used its asteroid-breaking equipment to crack harvester vessels like eggs. The yacht Golden Dawn achieved ramming speed, and Richard, the wealthy businessman who had never done anything brave in his life, died with a smile on his face as his ship punched through a harvester carrier. The hospital ship No Mercy proved that surgical lasers designed to cut human flesh could cut through machine armor just as well. Victor and his mining crew from Tartarus 9 boarded a disabled harvester, and they took it apart with plasma cutters and bare hands, and they used its own components as weapons against other machines. The harvesters began to adapt. They had programming for this. They targeted the human vessels with concentrated fire, and they sent swarms of collector drones to overwhelm individual ships, but the humans would not stop. A freighter captain named Wong saw her ship torn in half by harvester fire. She put on a spacesuit, and she jumped to the nearest harvester vessel, and she climbed inside through a hull breach, and she found the machine's core systems, and she destroyed them with a fire axe she had grabbed from her ship's emergency station. A research scientist named Desha Patel realized that his vessel's mass spectrometer could be overloaded to create a focused beam of particles. he used it to destroy 12 harvesters. Before the device exploded and took his ship with it, his last words were transmitted to the fleet. That was for science. The tourist liner Exodus had no weapons at all, but it had 300 human passengers. They landed on Velith Prime in escape pods, and they fought the ground-based harvesters with whatever they could find. An accountant from New Tokyo killed a collector drone with a fire extinguisher. A schoolteacher from London organized a group of Vellani survivors and led them to safety. Through a collapsed tunnel, a teenage girl from Brazil found a damaged Vellani defense turret, and she figured out how to operate it, and she held a bridge for 4 hours while civilians evacuated. The harvesters had never experienced this. They had harvested thousands of species, and none of them had fought like this. None of them had refused to die. None of them had kept coming no matter the cost. Their programming began to generate new classifications for this enemy Diangio USUA BRGL Little Level EX Theorem 4. The first time in millions of years, the ancient machines felt something their creators had programmed them to feel in emergencies. It was not quite fear, but it was close. Admiral Chun's diplomatic vessel had taken heavy damage and her crew was down to 12 from the original 40, but she was still fighting. She stood on her cracked bridge and she watched the battle unfold. And she saw her people dying by the dozens, but she also saw them winning slowly and painfully and at terrible cost, but winning, Mom, Okafor said, and his voice was weak because he was badly wounded. Harvester forces are pulling back from the northern continent. Push into the gap and get those civilians evacuated. Yes, ma'am. Chun looked at the tactical display. Half her fleet was gone, more than 200 ships destroyed, thousands of humans dead, but the harvesters were dying too, and the Vellani were being saved. That was all that mattered, Admiral. A communications officer called out, "We are receiving a transmission from the Concord fleet." What? They say they are 18 hours away, and they want us to hold position until they arrive. Chun laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Tell them we will try, but no promises. She turned back to the battle. There was still work. To dome humans did not stop until the work was done. The battle had raged for 6 hours, and the human fleet was dying. But so were the harvesters. Captain Marcus Okonkwo of the Persistent Memory was still alive somehow, and his ship was barely holding together, and they had lost artificial gravity 4 hours ago. Captain Sarah the engineer called up from the engine room. We have maybe 30 minutes of power left, and the hull is failing in 7 places. Can we still move? Barely. Can we still shoot? The mining laser is at 12%, but yes. Then we keep fighting. Marcus looked at his crew. They had started with 12. They were down to 5. Thomas, the pilot, was dead, and he had died at his station, keeping the ship on course, while a harvester beam cut through the bridge. 3 engineers had been lost when the cargo bay decompressed. One more had died fighting off a boarding party of collector drones, but the remaining 5 were still fighting, because that was what humans died in. The surface of Velith Prime, the situation was equally desperate. The 300 tourists from the Exodus had been reduced to less than 100, and they were scattered across the burning planet in small groups. Jennifer Chun was one of them. She was Admiral Chun's niece, although she had not seen her aunt in years, and she had been on vacation when the attack began. Now she was crouched behind a collapsed wall with a group of 12 Vellani children and a dying Vellani teacher named Corvith. The machines, Corvith whispered, they are coming back, and you should run and save yourself. Jennifer looked at the children. They were so small, and their bioluminescent skin was dim with fear, and they were looking at her like she could save them. She was a college student. She had never fired a weapon in her life. She was terrified, but she was also human. I am not leaving, she said. You will die, maybe, but I am still not leaving. She picked up a metal bar from the rubble. It was not much of a weapon, but it was something the collector drones came around the corner and they were spider-like machines with harvesting appendages, and they scuttled toward the group with mechanical precision. Jennifer screamed out in fear and rage. She charged the first drone, and she swung the metal bar with all her strength. And she felt the impact jar her arms as she connected with its sensor cluster. The drone stumbled, and Jennifer hit it again and again and again. She did not know how to fight, but she knew how to be angry, and right now she was very, very angry. The other drones converged on her, and she knew she was going to die, and she hoped she had bought the children enough time to run. Then she heard a sound. Terrible, beautiful sounded. Was the sound of human voices raised in fury. More humans emerged from the ruins, and they were armed with whatever they could find, and they crashed into the drones like a wave. An accountant with a fire extinguisher, a chef with kitchen knives, an elderly man with a walking stick that he wielded like a sword. They were not soldiers. They were tourists, but they were human tourists, and they had remembered what that meant. Jennifer felt hands pulling her back, and she looked up to see a young man with a bloody face grinning at her. "Nice work," he said. "Now get the kids to the evacuation point, and we will hold them off. There are too many." "Yeah, probably, but that is not really the point, is it?" He turned and charged back into the fight. Jennifer grabbed the Vellani children, and she ran behind her. She heard the sounds of battle, the sounds of humans dying, the sounds of humans refusing to stop. She ran faster. In orbit, the battle had reached its climax. Admiral Chun's vessel was dead in space, and she had transferred her flag to a cargo ship called the Defiance, which was only slightly less damaged. "Status report," she demanded. "We have 173 vessels still operational, ma'am, and the harvesters are down to approximately 2,000 ships. Civilian evacuation. 60% of the Vellani population has been evacuated or moved to protected shelters, and the harvesters have lost control of 4 continents." Chun nodded. They were winning. It did not feel like winning. It felt like drowning, but slightly slower than the enemy. "Ma'am, we are detecting a massive energy buildup in the harvester fleet." "What kind?" "Unknown, but it is big, and they are concentrating their remaining forces." Chun studied the tactical display. Harvesters were pulling back from the planet, and they were gathering in a single massive formation, and something at the center of that formation was glowing. "They are going to do something desperate," she said. "What do we do, ma'am?" Chun looked at her remaining fleet, 173 ships, cargo vessels, and mining platforms, and whatever else had survived. They had already lost so much. They had already given so much. "All vessels," she broadcast. "The enemy is gathering for something big, and I do not know what it is, but I know we cannot let them do it." She took a breath. "We are going to charge directly into their formation, and we are going to break them apart before they can finish whatever they are planning." Silence on the channel. Then voices began responding. "Persistent memory standing by, and let us finish this. Mining platform Hammerfall ready to hammer. Fuel tanker Prometheus here, and I have been saving myself for something special. This is the research vessel Curiosity, and we are curious to see how many of them we can take with us." More voices. More ships, more humans ready to die. Chen felt tears on her cheeks again. "All vessels," she said. "It has been an honor serving with you, and now let us show these machines what happens when you threaten our friends." The human fleet surged forward. 173 ships against 2,000. Impossible odds, but humans had been doing impossible things since they first climbed down from the trees. The final charge began. Harvesters opened fire and human ships began to die, but the humans kept coming. The persistent memory was hit by 3 beams simultaneously, and Captain Marcus knew his ship was finished. "All hands," he called. "Abandon ship, and I will take her in alone." "Negative, Captain," Sarah responded. "We are staying. That is an order. With respect." "Captain, you can take your order and put it somewhere uncomfortable, because we did not come this far to leave." Now Marcus laughed. "All right, then, and all hands hold on." He aimed his dying ship at the heart of the harvester formation. "Tell my daughter," he said quietly. "Tell her I went out like a human." The persistent memory hit the glowing center of the harvester formation at maximum speed, and the resulting explosion took 37 enemy vessels with it. The formation shattered. The energy buildup that had been building dissipated. Whatever the harvesters had been planning would never happen, because humans would not let it happen, because that was what humans did. Remaining human ships crashed into the scattered harvesters, and the battle became a brutal close-quarters brawl. No tactics, no strategy, just violence and fury, and the refusal to stop fighting. When the Concorde fleet finally arrived 12 hours later, they found something they could not explain. The harvesters were gone, not retreating, gone, destroyed. To the last machine, the human fleet had been reduced to 47 vessels, 47 ships out of 437. The rest were debris and sacrifice and legend. But they had won. The Concorde fleet arrived to a graveyard. Admiral Vorath of the Mindari commanded the relief force, and he had spent the entire journey preparing for a desperate rescue mission. He had expected to find the humans dead, and the Volani nearly extinct, and the harvesters preparing to move on to their next target. Instead, he found silence. The harvesters were gone, completely, utterly, totally gone. Their shattered remains drifted through the system in clouds of metal debris, and their carrier ships were broken hulks, and their collector drones were scattered across the planet's surface in pieces. And among the debris, he found humans. They were pulling survivors from wrecked ships, and they were treating wounded Volani on the planet's surface, and they were organizing rescue operations with whatever resources they had left. They were also singing. Admiral Vorath did not understand humans. He was a Mindari, and his species prided itself on understanding everything, but humans had always been beyond his comprehension. He opened a channel to the nearest human vessel. "This is Admiral Vorath of the Galactic Concorde Relief Fleet, and I am requesting to speak with the commanding officer of the human forces." There was a pause, then a tired voice responded. "This is Commander David Okafor of the cargo vessel Defiance, acting commander of the human fleet, and Admiral Chun was wounded 3 hours ago, and she is currently in surgery." "Commander Okafor, I need to understand what happened here." "We won." "Yes, I can see that, but how? And you had no military vessels, and you had no weapons, and you were outnumbered by a factor of 15 to 1. Okafor was quiet for a moment. "We remember what we are," he finally said. Vorath did not understand, but he was beginning to suspect that he never would. On the surface of Velith Prime, the survivors were gathering. Jennifer Chun had made it to the evacuation point with all 12 Volani children and the dying teacher. Corvith had somehow survived. Jennifer sat among the rubble, and she held one of the smaller children in her arms, and the child's bioluminescent skin was slowly beginning to glow again. "Human," the child said. "Why did you come, and why did you fight for us?" Jennifer did not know how to answer. She was not a philosopher or a soldier or a diplomat. She was just a college student who had been on vacation. "Because you needed help," she finally said, "and because we could help, and because that is what we do." "But you almost died." "Yes, were you not afraid?" Jennifer laughed, and it was a shaky sound. "I was terrified, and I have never been so scared in my life." "Then why did you not run?" Jennifer looked at the child, and she thought about that question. Why had she not run? She could have hidden, and she could have let someone else handle it, and she could have saved herself. But she had not, because running had never been an option, because something inside her had refused to abandon those children, because she was human, because running would have been worse than dying, she said. "Because I would have had to live with knowing I did not help when I could have helped, and I do not think I could have done that." The child did not fully understand, but that was okay. The Volani were not Deathworlders. She would never fully understand what drove humans to do the things they did. But they would remember. They would always remember. Ambassador Kethrix arrived on Velith Prime 2 days after the battle ended, and she walked through the ruins of her homeworld in a daze. The destruction was immense, Entire cities had been reduced to gray ash. Millions of her people were dead. But billions had survived because of the humans. She found Admiral Chung in a medical tent, and the Admiral was conscious but weak, and her body was wrapped in bandages from dozens of wounds. Ambassador Chen said, "I am glad you are safe." Kethrix did not know what to say. How did you thank someone who had sacrificed so much for strangers? Admiral, I do not have words. You do not need words, and I am just glad we were in time, and we were almost too late. You saved us, and your people died by the thousands to save us. And why? Chung closed her eyes, because it was the right thing to do, and because we could not just watch, and because my grandmother told me something once, and she said that we are wolves who have learned to live among sheep, and she said that one day the other wolves would come, and we would need to remember what we are. She opened her eyes, and Kethrix saw something ancient in those tired human eyes. The other wolves came, and we remembered. You could have stayed safe, and the Concord would have eventually responded. Yes, but eventually was not good enough, and 12 billion lives were at stake, and we could not wait. Kethrix reached out with a tentacle and touched the Admiral's bandaged hand. My people will never forget this debt, and we will never forget what you did for us. It was not a debt, and it was just the right thing to do. Perhaps, but we will remember. Anyway, Chun smiled weakly. Then do me one favor? Anything. When you tell the story, make sure they know that we were scared, and make sure they know we were not warriors, and most of us had never held a weapon before. Why is that important? Because that is what makes it matter, and being brave when you are not afraid is easy, but being brave when you are terrified, and when you know you are going to die, and when every instinct is screaming at you to run, and still choosing to stay and fight and protect strangers. Chun's voice dropped to a whisper. That is what being human means, and that is the story I want people to remember. Kethrix nodded. I will tell them, and I will make sure the galaxy knows. She turned to leave, then stopped. Admiral, your brother James asked me to give you a message. James, and is he all right? He is fine, and he wanted me to tell you that grandmother would have been proud. Chung closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Tell him I know, and tell him to come visit when I am out of this bed, and we have a lot to talk about. I will. Kethrix left the medical tent, and she walked out into the ruined landscape of her home world. Above her, human ships were still conducting rescue operations in human. Doctors were treating the wounded, and human engineers were rebuilding infrastructure 3 days ago. She had thought of humans as gentle giants who were too soft to survive in a dangerous galaxy. Now she knew the truth. They were not soft. They had never been soft. They had simply chosen to be gentle, and when gentleness was not enough, they had chosen something else. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again, and that was exactly as it should be. News of the Battle of Velith Prime spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. Every species heard the story. Every civilization learned what the humans had done, and everyone reacted differently. The Kreth warriors were the first to respond. Juthax, who had once shared drinks with Ambassador James Chun, watched the battle recordings with his entire clan gathered around him. They saw cargo ships ramming harvester carriers. They saw civilians fighting with improvised weapons. They saw humans dying by the hundreds, and the survivors refusing to retreat. When the recording ended, Gorthax stood in silence. His clan waited for him to speak. I mocked them, he finally said. I mocked their soft voices and their careful movements and their ridiculous gloves. And I asked them why they pretended to be weak. He looked at his fellow warriors. I was a fool, and they were never weak, and they were holding themselves back because they knew what would happen. If they did not, his clan elders spoke up. What would happen? Gorthax gestured at the frozen image of a human ship exploding inside a harvester formation. That would happen, and they would destroy everything in their path, including themselves, and they knew that. And so they chose to be gentle, because being gentle was harder than being violent. The elder considered this. You are saying they are stronger than us. No, and I am saying they are stronger than anyone. And I am saying that any species that can hold back that much fury and that much power, and still choose to be kind, is not a species to be mocked. He turned to face his clan fully. From this day forward, the Kreth will honor humans as we honor no other species. And we will send our young warriors to train with them, and we will learn not just how to fight, but how to choose when to fight. The clan roared in approval. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Mindary scholars wrote thousands of papers trying to understand human psychology, and they could not explain how a species could be so gentle and so terrifying at the same time. Their greatest philosopher wrote one simple line that became famous. Humans are what happens when prey decides to become predator and never forgets what it was like to be hunted. The Bellani built monuments on every world they controlled, and every monument showed the same thing: human ships charging into impossible odds. Human civilians fighting with whatever they could find, human doctors and engineers rebuilding what had been destroyed. The inscription on every monument was the same. They came when no one else would, and they died so that we could live, and we will never forget. The Galactic Concord held emergency sessions for weeks, trying to understand what had happened and how to respond. Some species were frightened. They had seen what humans could do when they stopped holding back, and they wondered what would happen if humans ever decided to turn that. Violence against the Concord itself, Ambassador James Chun addressed the Concord personally. He stood before representatives of 100 species, and he spoke in his soft, careful voice. I know many of you are afraid, and I understand, and you have seen what we are capable of, and you are wondering if we will ever do that to you. He paused and looked around the chamber. The answer is no, and we will not, and not because we cannot, but because we choose not to. How can we trust that choice? A Mindari representative asked. James smiled, and it was a sad smile. You cannot. And that is the truth. And you cannot trust it because trust is not something that can be demanded or forced, and it has to be earned. He spread his hands. All I can tell you is this, and for 300 years we have chosen to be gentle, and we have chosen to hold back, and we have chosen to be diplomats instead of conquerors. But you could change your minds. Yes, we could. Anyone can change their minds at any time, and the Vellani were peaceful for 1,000 years. And then the harvesters came, and nothing is permanent. He looked directly at the Mindari. But I will tell you what my grandmother told me, and she said that being human means having the power to destroy and choosing to protect instead. And she said that the choice is what matters and not the power. The chamber was silent. We are not asking you to trust us, James continued, and we are asking you to watch us and judge us by our actions and not our potential. And we have shown you what we can do when we are pushed, but we have also shown you what we choose to do when we are not. He gestured at the recordings of human doctors treating Vellani wounded and human engineers rebuilding Vellani cities. That is who we choose to be, and that choice is made every single day, and it is not easy, and it is not automatic, and it is a constant struggle against our own nature. He looked around the chamber one final time. But it is a choice we will keep making, because that is what makes us human and not just Deathworlders. And because the galaxy deserves better than to be ruled by fear. He stepped back from the podium. The chamber erupted in debate, but something had changed. The Concord would never again dismiss humans as reformed Deathworlders who had gone soft. They would remember Velith Prime. They would remember what 437 ships crewed by civilians had done against an enemy that had destroyed thousands of civilizations. They would remember the singing Admiral Chun recovered slowly. Her wounds were severe, and the doctors said she would never fully heal, and she would walk with a limp for the rest of her life. She did not care. She had done what needed to be done. She had woken the wolves, and the wolves had saved 12 billion lives. 1 month after the battle, she received a visitor. It was Gorthax, the Kreth warrior. He knelt before her hospital bed, and he spoke in a voice heavy with emotion. Admiral Chun and I have come to apologize. For what? For mocking your people and for thinking you were weak and for not understanding what you truly are. Chun laughed softly. Stand up, Gorthax, and I do not need your apologies. Then what do you need? Chun thought about it. I need the galaxy to understand that we did not do this for glory, and we did not do this to show off our power, and we did this because innocent people were dying, and we could help. I understand. Good. And then go home and tell your people that story, and tell them that being strong means knowing when not to fight. And it means choosing to protect the weak, and it means holding back until holding back is no longer an option. Gorthax nodded. I will tell them. And Gorthax. Yes, Admiral. Next time you meet a human wearing ceremonial gloves, do not mock them, and those gloves are not a sign of weakness, and they are a promise. A promise of what? Chun met his eyes. A promise that we will try our best to be gentle, and a promise that we know what we are, and a promise that we will only unleash ourselves when there is no other choice. She smiled, and there was something ancient and dangerous in that smile. The gloves are our way of telling the galaxy that we are trying, and that we care enough to try. Gorthax stared at her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. I understand, Admiral, and I will make sure my people understand as well. He turned and left Chun lay back in her bed and closed her eyes. Outside, her window human ships were still working and still helping and still rebuilding. That was the legacy she wanted, not the battle, not the destruction, but the aftermath, the healing, the choice to build instead of destroy. That was what being human really meant. 500 years past the Battle of Velith Prime became more than history. It became legend. Every species in the galaxy told the story differently, but the core remained the same. When the ancient machines came to devour the innocent, the humans answered. They came in cargo ships and mining vessels and pleasure yachts. They came with improvised weapons and impossible courage. They came knowing they would die, and they won. The Villani made it a holy day every year on the anniversary of the battle. They gathered in the rebuilt cities, and they lit bioluminescent flames in memory of the humans who had died. They sang songs that had been composed in those terrible hours when death fell from the sky and hope arrived from the stars. The children learned the names of the heroes. Captain Marcus Okonkwo of the Persistent Memory, who gave his life to break the Harvester. Formation Jennifer Chun, the college student who had stood with a metal bar against machines and refused to abandon children who were not her own. Victor, the miner who had boarded Harvester vessels and torn them apart with his bare hands. Richard, the wealthy businessman who would spend 50 years being comfortable and then chose to spend his last hours being brave. So many names, so many stories, so many humans who had chosen to be more than what the galaxy expected. The Kreth made it part of their warrior tradition. Every young Kreth who wanted to become a true warrior had to first learn the human way. They had to learn restraint before they learned violence. They had to learn mercy before they learned killing. They had to learn that true strength was knowing when not to fight the greatest Kreth. Warriors wore ceremonial gloves in honor of the humans, not because they needed to hide their hands, but because they wanted to remember the lesson. The Mindari studied the battle for centuries. They wrote millions of papers and conducted thousands of analyses, and they still could not fully explain human psychology. How could a species be so gentle and so terrible? How could the same beings who wore gloves to avoid frightening others also charge into certain death for strangers? Their greatest philosopher spent her entire life studying humans, and in the end she wrote a single book. The book was called The Choice. Her conclusion was simple: humans were not defined by their capacity for violence, although that capacity was immense. Humans were defined by their capacity to choose. They could choose to be gentle or terrible. They could choose to hold back or unleash themselves. They could choose to protect or destroy, and the miracle was that they kept choosing to be good, even when being good was harder. That was what made them human. That was what made them legendary ambassador. Catherix lived for another 60 years after the battle. She spent those years telling the stories. She traveled to every corner of the galaxy, and she spoke to every species that would listen, and she told them what she had seen. Never mistake a human's gentleness for weakness, she would say. They are not tame, and they are not reformed, and they are not harmless. They are something far more dangerous. They are choosing to be kind, and if you ever make them choose differently, you will learn what Deathworlders really are. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 200, and her last words were a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for remembering." The humans had come to her funeral. Admiral Chun, who was old and gray and still walked with a limp ambassador, James Chun, who had become one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy. Jennifer Chen, who had become a teacher and spent her life educating Villani children. 3 generations of one human family paying respects to an alien who had become a friend. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy remembered, and Faye remembered. The end that was the true legacy of Velith Prime, not the battle, not the victory, not the terrible violence of humans unleashed. The true legacy was the relationship that came after humans and Villani became inseparable allies. Human doctors worked on Villani worlds, Villani artists created on human worlds. The 2 species grew together and learned from each other and became something neither could have been alone, and every year on the anniversary, they gathered together, humans and Villani and Kreth and Mindari and 100 other species. They gathered to remember the day when cargo ships and mining vessels had saved a civilization. They gathered to remember the choice that humans had made. They gathered to remember what it meant to be brave. The inscription on the great memorial at Velith Prime was translated into every language in the galaxy. They asked us to be gentle, so we were, and they asked us to be patient, so we were, and they asked us to be peaceful, so we were. And then they hurt the innocent, and they asked us to be merciful. We were not. Below that inscription was another line, added centuries later by human and Villani hands working together. But when it was over, we chose to be gentle again, because that is the human way. The galaxy had many legend stories of great warriors and powerful empires and terrible wars, but the story of Velith Prime was different. It was not a story about power or conquest or glory. It was a story about choice, about a species that could have ruled through fear but chose to serve through kindness, about civilians who could have run but chose to fight, about Deathworlders who could have destroyed everything but chose to protect instead. That was the legend that spread across the galaxy. That was the story that parents told their children. That was the truth that everyone remembered. Humans were dangerous. Humans were terrifying. Humans were exactly what monsters were afraid of, but humans were also kind and gentle and good, because they chose to be, and that choice made all the difference. Stars turned and civilizations rose and fell and empires grew and crumbled, but the story of the day Deathworlders refused to hold back lived on. It lived in the songs of the Villani and the traditions of the Kreth and the studies of the Mindariat, lived in the memorial on Velith Prime and the ceremonial gloves that warriors wore with pride. It lived in the hearts of every being who heard the tale and wondered what they would have done. Would they have run? Would they have hidden? Would they have let strangers die because saving them was too hard? Or would they have remembered what it meant to be brave? They humans had answered that question, and the galaxy would never forget. The end.